Good morning. My name's Joe Hamilton. I am the CEO and chairman of Unigold Inc. We're a company developing a gold asset in the Dominican Republic. We'll start with a small oxide project, heap leach, and move into a larger sulfide project over a number of years. We've been active for about 20 years in the Dominican Republic. And I'm happy to tell the story today, Matt, and thanks for taking the time.
Joe, good to see you again. We saw you last July, and we've spoken a few times, actually. But I got to start with share price. It's not been a good 12 months for you guys. Share price has come off. To be fair, I think precious metals came off across the market the end of last year. You're still a sub $20 million company. People don't seem to be getting this story. Is it the Dominican Republic effect? Are people looking towards Barrick and Goldquest and thinking, well, it's impossible to get permits here?
Well, I think that's it. I mean, that's the pushback I've been getting, Matt, for close to 3 years now. Is that it doesn't matter how many ounces you have in the Dominican Republic, which we've got over 2.2 million ounces now. It doesn't matter what we've got. You'll never be able to develop it anyway. And I find that patently incorrect. We wouldn't be operating over the last 10 years in the Dominican Republic if we didn't believe that we could bring these things to fruition. In addition, we wouldn't have spent $12 to $15 million over the last 3 years to develop these things, and we certainly wouldn't be in a feasibility study at this point for our oxide portion of the deposit. It's my belief that that permitting can be done in the Dominican Republic, but like any country, the critical thing is having community support and having communities, want to see the mining development in the area. So that's we've been working fairly diligently on our corporate social responsibility and our community engagements, actually for the last 10 years, and that's coming to fruition for us now.
But you say that, and lots of companies come on the show and say similar things. I'm looking at Barrick. They've got all the money in the world to develop the right sorts of local community initiatives, ESG programs. Goldquest not too shabby either in terms of their balance sheet. So why are you going to be able to do it where they can't?
Well, I think there's a lot of let's say population pressure in some of these areas. For instance, in at least where Barrick is operating in the Dominican Republic around Banao, where Pueblo Viejo is, there's other mines operating in that area as well. So it's a mining district. However, it's also fairly heavily populated and has been for 20 or 30 years, because I think you can point at almost any place on the planet. And when mines come into operation, people move into the area because there's opportunity, there's jobs, there's spin-off jobs. So you get population growth. Where we are working in the western part of the country, it's fairly remote. There's not a lot of infrastructure, and the communities that we're working around, our polls that we've done with them have shown that we have, probably about an 85% approval rating in those local areas. People want to see the infrastructure. They want to see the roads built up. They want to see the electrical grid built up, and they want to see the jobs that come with it. So those spin-off benefits help. So community support is incredibly important. I think in Barrick's case, they're working on getting that. But there's always misinformation that's put into the marketplace about projects, and that misinformation has to be countered by the mining companies with proper information. A lot of times, at least what I've seen, I'm sure you've seen the same thing, is people start to resist projects before they've even seen the environmental impact assessment or seen what the potential problems may be or potential solutions may be with a mining project. And these knee-jerk reactions start early. They're very difficult to sort of repel without having those studies in hand. So we started our environmental and social impact assessment last year, and we will be able to table that in hopefully in the third quarter of this year, so that we'll be able to address any issues from the communities. But to date, we've got great support from our local communities, and I think we'll be able to move this project forward fairly swiftly this year. Okay,
so since we spoke, you did two raises. You did one about 3.275 in August, just after we spoke, and again in October, 2.34 million. So you're not finding it hard to raise the money, but what are you doing with the money? Because it's not having any effect on the share price or your market cap. So is this some kind of slow burn type of approach? I mean, what do you say to shareholders when you're going off and raising money and then spending the money and it's not having any effect?
Well, it's funny because If we could take that money and immediately move into the market and try to buy stock, we might have an effect on the share price. What we can do is with the project is move it up the value chain. And moving it up the value chain means moving it towards a production decision where it can actually become cash flow positive, and you can take those ounces out of the ground that you've discovered. And we spent a fair amount of money trying to discover those 2.25 million ounces that we have in the ground. What we've been doing with the money is obviously going through the permitting. We've started an environmental assessment process. We've started our feasibility, detailed feasibility work, which starts with the geotechnical work around the heap leach facility. We have completed drilling the inferred material to move it into the measured indicated category. And hopefully we'll see a substantial portion of the oxides, the inferred oxides, move into the measured indicated category. We've completed column testing on the heap leach samples that we had for run-of-mine column testing, and we found some great recoveries there, Matt, where we've seen 92 to 95% recovery over 110 days. Just to remind our investors and the people that have been looking at this story, we used an 80% recovery in our preliminary economic assessment, and we've shown that we can get 92 to 95% recovery in large diameter column testing with run-of-mine material. So, I've always said that this heap leach project and the oxide project is simple. Our objective is to move that up the value chain, and that's what we've been spending our time and money on over the last 4 or 5 months. And I think we'll be able to deliver that feasibility study in the third quarter of this year as well, and show people that we're ready for the construction process.
So it breaks down to two, just for people who perhaps new to the story or perhaps can't quite remember the last conversation. And we'll put a link below to the last conversation so they can get into the weeds a bit. But you kind of got the oxide portion, you've got the sulfide portion, right? So oxide, obviously the easier, cheaper, and I guess near term cash if you can get there. And I want to talk about that in a second. But to be able to do that, you're going to need your permits in place too. So in terms of conversation, in terms of timing, where are you?
Well, in late February, we submitted the application for an exploitation license. And that's the first step to convert the exploration concession that we've got into an exploitation or a mining license over the area. So we submitted that application, which is a fair amount of backup and paperwork required. The ministry accepted that as complete. It's going through the ministry process. Once they have approved it and said that the coordinates jive and everything is complete as far as the paperwork is concerned, we'll have to publish that in a national newspaper for comment. Wait a week, publish it again. Wait another few weeks to see if there's any comments about it. At which point the application should be ready for approval. So that's sort of the process we're going through. We're about 2 weeks into it now. I think it'll probably take another 4 to 8 weeks to go through the entire process. But once again, as you get into permitting, no one's quite sure how long these things take. So what I'm directing the market or trying to manage expectations is that by the end of June or early July, we should have those permits in hand. So that's the path we're going on. After that, of course, we'll have to get environmental permits, construction permits. There's another 16 permits that need to be assembled after that.
So another, how many? 16?
Well, there's approximately 16 that you need, from water offtake to transport permits to all the standard permits that you need to move things along. Once you've got the exploitation license and the environmental permit, the rest of them are fairly standard.
Fairly standard in what sense? In the sense of how long they take? That there's a defined approval time process.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Which would be what? End to end would look like what in a perfect world?
We would like to be in a position to be able to break ground in December or January. December of this year or January of next year, Matt. And the logic behind that is that that's when the rains, the rainy season in the Dominican Republic ends in November. It's always easier to do construction during the dry season. And that's what we've been guiding most of the government ministries towards, as well as that, we'd really like to have all of these permits in hand by that time so we can get to work.
Okay,
in,
so
December or January.
Perfect. Okay, so again, I just want to remind people. I want you to remind people. Okay, with the oxide project, there's not a whole stack of answers. The bulk of this is in the sulfides, right? That's correct. And when we talked last time, there was a kind of 50-50 in terms of 50% was in M&I, and you're looking to bring the inferred into that category with your drilling. But what does the oxide do for you, given that it's the kind of, I guess, the cheaper the heap leach process, the cash flow could be, relative. Sorry, the capex could be relatively cheap, and therefore you could actually finance accessing the larger sulfide portion of this. So how are you planning? Has your thinking changed?
Not at all. Our strategy for the last 3 years has been fairly straightforward, and I think we've tried to communicate that to the market. The oxide portion of the deposit, it's a fairly small deposit. It produces about 30,000 ounces a year over a 3 to 4 year period.
Right, got it.
Over about a 3 to 4 year period. But the objective behind the oxide portion of the deposit, and it's quite simple. I mean, this is simply removing soil that's sitting on top of a small hill and moving it downhill to a heap leach pad. So a fairly simple operation to leach as well. But the idea is that the area that we're working in has no operating mines. Most of the people who live in the area and the local communities haven't seen what a mine can do for themselves or for the communities. And there's not a lot of trained workforce in the area that we're going to need. So the idea behind bringing the smaller deposit online first is it's proof of concept for the market. It lets people know that we've got the permits can be in hand and that we can develop a deposit. It trains a workforce for us in the area, which is incredibly important. Sets up our logistics and our suppliers in country before we move into the much larger sulfide project. Now, the sulfide project right now is about 2.1 million ounces in all categories. It's still open to depth. There are high-grade areas in here that probably define about 800,000 ounces of that are going to be running over 4 to 5 grams as an average grade, as compared to the much larger deposit, which is currently running about 1.5 grams. So we need to work out, which we'll do over the course of the rest of this year, how we go about attacking those sulfides. On the one hand, you've got the gigantic project that a major mining company will do, which is large open pit, large tailings facility, large waste piles, large environmental footprint. On the other hand, the underground portion, which is the higher grade portion, may be more profitable for us by simply going in and extracting the higher grade material, lower capex, lower environmental footprint without a doubt. So we've got some work to do on those sulfides as well. But the oxides and the sulfides are two standalone projects. We're not going to delay on developing the oxides to wait for that information on the sulfides. We can move forward with the oxides now. And it gives us those intangibles, which is, the community support that we need and trains the workforce that we need in the area.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that because you've raised some money in the market. I'll come back to what the expectation is from the people who have invested in your company. I mean, what's the share register look like? Is it mostly North Americans looking in and hoping that Dominican Republic is the next district or jurisdiction for gold, or are you getting a lot of local support on that? What's it look like?
Interestingly enough, in the last 6 months, we've rolled over about 40 to 50% of our float. So the stock trades fairly well. Currently, our largest shareholder is still Eric Sprott, who still owns approximately 12% of the company on an outstanding basis. The Phoenix Gold Fund bought in and raised their portion to about 8% in the financing that we did last July, August. And they're, basically out of Asia. The bulk of our other investors are mostly North American, Canadian, and U.S. investors. Although in October last year, we managed to attract the first money from investors in the Dominican Republic, who purchased, in total, I think we offered about 9% of the company at that time. So it gave me great comfort to see that individuals within the Dominican Republic were now ready to invest in this project and in our company. So that that gives me all kinds of comfort, because what it means is that those people who know far more about operating in the Dominican Republic than most investors are willing to put their hard-earned dollars into this project as well, and to help with the development of the project.
So, so you're saying of the October 2.34 million, 9% of that went to locals, Dominican people from living in.
Substantially, the entire investment that we did in October last year, which was about 2.2 million, went to residents in the Dominican Republic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Well, that's got to help.
Well, I think so. I mean, and it's also, the investment that we were managed to attract, we're from companies that are doing business in the Dominican Republic now. They have interests in construction, aggregates. That they know how to do permitting in the DR. They run mines in the DR, albeit not metallic mines, but certainly are familiar with doing business in the DR, quite comfortable with it, obviously, because they have operating businesses there. So they don't see any issue with us getting permits in the country. When they were able to look at the preliminary economic assessment on the oxides, which I think was the key to attracting those advanced investments, they were able to see the economics behind it and understand it. I think that is certainly makes me more comfortable about the permitting process we're going through now.
So how are you for cash then? Because if you're talking about doing a feasibility study, normally there's some big numbers associated with that. And if you're talking about potentially being able to getting the permits you need to for all the permits you need, quite frankly, by the end of this year or January. Well, tell me about the money situation, because I'm sorry, because you said that the oxides and the sulfides non-correlated in that sense earlier, didn't you? So how do you move it forward on a tight budget like that?
Yeah, well, it's that's what I like to do is to move things forward on tight budgets. But once again, Matt, I think
you've got to do it properly as well. Do you know what I mean? So you got to say to people, look, we're doing the things properly. It's just we can do it cheaper than than you perhaps are used to hearing.
Absolutely, and the way we're doing this is, just to get down to the cash position, including prepaids, because we prepaid for a lot of the geotechnical work and a lot of the environmental work. Including the prepaids, we probably have about $1.6 million in the bank at this point. Now, the projected budget to get us through feasibility and the end of the ESIA, we're burning about $300,000 a month at this point. So, one of the terms that I love to hear people say, which I never will, is we're fully financed. You hear that from exploration companies all the time, and the fact is, exploration companies are never fully financed until they've got diversification in number of mines to make that happen. So there's no question that over the course of this year, we'll be looking for project financing. That's my task starting as soon as I have the initial numbers on the feasibility study, is to go out and start looking for project financing, which of course will include equity and debt. So we'll be doing that over the course of this year. We'll probably be, once again, exploration companies are always looking to raise funds. To answer your question about, what's this going to cost as far as a feasibility study is concerned, the environmental work we're using mostly local consultants. The Dominican Republic is, it's an advanced economy. We can find biologists, we can find people in country that have PhDs and masters in these things. We've used a local firm to assemble them. We're getting Knight Piésold to, let's say, review the work that's being done and ensure that it's being done to international standards. So we're using international consultants to ensure, at least on the environmental and social impact assessment, that is coming up to global standards. But we are using local people, which of course cuts our costs. We don't need to bring in a team of international consultants to do this and drop them in country. Remember that we run our own drills. And our drilling rates are about $100 a meter, which is probably the cheapest in the industry, because we're able to run our own drills and make that happen. As far as the feasibility work is concerned, we will manage the feasibility work. We're not putting in a general contractor to do it, which generally adds about 20 to 30% to the cost of a feasibility study. We currently have Tierra Group doing the geotechnical work and the heap leach facility designs. We've contracted them individually. Micon will do our update on our mineral resource estimate. Once that's done, then we'll award a contract to do the final designs with the ADR and the cash flows. And all of that should be done by the end of June. So, managing it is just a matter of understanding the process and making sure that you're getting the best bang for the buck on the way through. So, to get to the final end of the feasibility study is probably going to cost us about another $300,000 to $400,000 in terms of consultants, and we'll be doing more drilling and more exploration in the meantime as well.
Right. So you will be raising money later this year. You're going to have to at that current burn rate with the cash that you've got in, right? But
absolutely.
But to get to the end of the year, when you've got your numbers from your feasibility study, and to be able to then go and raise the money for it'll be a relatively small capital. Heap leaches. We've seen numbers vary significantly. Have you got a sense of what sort of quantum you'd be talking about eventually to actually start the heap leach process? And have you got a number in mind as to what you're going to need to get through to the end of the year?
Well, yeah, the only numbers I can really talk to are the PEA numbers that we put out last year, which was a capex of about $35 million. And I suspect that will be something like $15 million in equity and $20 million in debt. The Dominican Republic has a relatively good risk rating when it comes to being able to raise debt, and I think a lot of that debt may be available in country as well. So that's sort of the quanta that we're looking for between now and the end of the year in order to get into production, and that also provides us with sufficient working capital. We may do the equity in a number of tranches. It's hard to say at this point.
I can't remember what gold number you were using on the PEA. I sort of remember a 34 million after tax NPV, but what?
Yeah, the gold number for the resources that were quoted, I believe the number that Micon used was $1,700 an ounce. But I believe for the economics and the PEA, I believe it was $1,600 an ounce.
Okay. So there's a little bit of tolerance in there. It's also interesting, I think, generally that the gold equities have not really, certainly down to the exploration end or development, and I think you would argue, have not sort of seen the reaction to gold price at the moment. What do you think is going on out there in the market?
Well, I think it's a number of things. I think we're seeing a swing in investors who now have even a shorter time frame for a return on their investments. It seems to me that there's fewer and fewer buy and hold investors in this market that see an opportunity and say, sure, that might take 4 or 5 years to come to fruition, but I'm willing to park my money there and wait because I have confidence in what they're doing. It seems to me that a lot of investors are in it for a 2-week, 3-week, 3-month, 6-month turnaround. Exploration is a long story. When back in the day when I started in this business, it took about 8 years, to go from discovery to production, and now that number is closer to about 17 to 20 years to go from discovery to production. These are long-term investments. People depend on exploration stories to give them leverage to the gold price. But for some reason, just in the last month or two, we've seen equity prices decouple from gold price movements. It's been very strange to me to watch when we know that certainly producers are going to get the benefit. No one's hedged anymore, or very few people are. They get the benefit from gold prices almost immediately, but that doesn't seem to come through to their share prices terribly quickly. So from an exploration story, it's hard to say. Where do we go? And I think it's really the time horizon for investors. But a lot of these exploration stories that turn into development stories, which is what we're going through, there's a huge potential to see gains in the share prices once that transition's made. But it's difficult picking your horse. Easy projects are best, low capital projects are best. And move forward from there.
So I kind of agree with a lot of what you said there, but just again, I remind myself of the strategy here, obviously between the oxide and the sulfide component, and I guess I know they're decoupled in that sense, but the oxides is the kind of quick win. It was again from memory, 25 million after tax free cash flow, but it was only for 3, maybe 4 years. Do you say, do you know what? Can we do some step back drilling? Can we make that 4 to 5 years rather than 3 to 4 years? Do you think the market would react to that, or do you think actually what's the point? We'll do it nearer the time because let's just get some cash flowing. It covers our costs. It allows us to do the work that we're going to need to do to develop the sulfide component of this. Because there's a balancing act of trying to paint a picture in the marketplace and get a reaction to the share price now versus just making sure your cost recovery, the dilution is minimized and assuming that you can raise the kind of 35 million or so to kind of get the oxide bit into production. The cash flow could come for that, despite it only being 3 to 4 years. What are the trade-offs?
I think that the oxide project will go beyond the 3.5 years that we're sort of got in the PEA, but you're not saying that in the feasibility study.
Most companies say that to me is well, we've had a 3-year life of mine for the last 8 years.
Let's put it this way, Matt. I prefer my statements to be conservative, and I prefer to run a more conservative company if possible. And the oxide portion of the deposit does have limits. There's no question. We've got some joy in some of the expansion drilling that we've been doing around moving the inferred into the measured and indicated category. And that's showing us that there is room to expand the oxides. But, it's not going to be an expansion to 10 years. It's just because of the way these things were developed. These are tropical weathering oxides. They're developed where the sulfides come to surface, and over 10 to 15 million years of tropical weathering, they turn into oxides. But they're not going to be super extensive. The real win is in the sulfide portion of the project. But the oxides, once again, do a number of things for us. They allow us to train a workforce in the area. They get the communities comfortable with what we're doing as far as mining is concerned and what the environmental impacts are. And they also allow us to set up our logistics in country, and they ensure that we've got appropriate infrastructure installed in, what is a fairly remote area before we start tackling the larger sulfide project. The sulfide project itself, will be some combination of open pit and underground. There's 2.1 million ounces available to us there in all categories. Half of it is in measured and indicated at this point. There's high grade portions in it as well. There's probably about 700,000 or 800,000 ounces of that, which run over 4 to 5 grams as an average grade. In some cases, up to half an ounce of gold per ton with silver and copper. How we go about extracting that, we're not getting sidetracked into the sulfides at this point. We'll be able to communicate that to the market in the second half of this year on how we intend to bring the sulfides into the larger operation. But what I want to keep our teams focused on right now is getting the oxide through the permitting, getting all the work we need done today so that we can start construction later this year on the oxide portion of the project. And that's a fairly, I wouldn't say monumental task, but there's a lot of threads that need to be pulled together into that tapestry.
I understand that, Joe, and I think you've done a good job of saying that, telling that story today. But it's a small story, right? What I want to understand is from that small story, does that generate enough cash to mean that shareholders today, or shareholders coming in today, looking for a high leverage play, can they interpret that saying, look, we can get to FID on the sulfide portion, which is a plus 2 million ounce resource, all categories at this point, but 50-50, because we're going to generate enough cash to go through the study phase relatively quickly, having proved the model out by dealing with the oxide portion, and not have to tap you up for more cash until we get to an FID position. That's what I want to hear. If I can hear that, I'm like, okay, I could get aboard with that, but what's the reality?
Yeah, the reality is, I don't know. We haven't looked at the size of the operation. Is this going to be an open pit that's going to be processing 25,000 tons a day, and it's going to require a flotation concentrator that can do the same? Capital cost on that's probably $500 million. But you'd be producing 150 to 180,000 ounces a year for a 10-year period. That's one project. There's another project that's an underground project that's probably about $100 to $120 million in capital, something in that range. It's a much smaller flotation concentrator, 3,000 ton per day operation, generating 80,000 to 100,000 ounces a year over a 10-year period. There's that project as well. The reality, Matt, is that this project will be something in that range in between those two. Those are probably end members. So the capital cost numbers, it's really tough to say. What I can say is that the oxide portion does indeed generate sufficient cash flow to get us through all of those studies and get us through all the permitting for that.
That's all I wanted to hear. That makes me feel comfortable. That's all I wanted to hear. Okay. But, and then I say, right, okay, that's finance. I'm not going to be tapped up for more cash if I invest in this thing. I can sit and go along this ride as you drive it up the value curve, right? And 10 cents today, a 20 million market cap. I don't think you got to do too much to go up from where you are today in the nicest possible way. I think that would be an interesting ride to go on. And so that's great. Then what I need to understand is second thing, and I think there's only two things here, is how long will that take? I get it's complicated. You've got a bunch of options available to you. There's some high grade stuff. It could be partly open pit and probably more than likely also underground. But what's the time frame for going through a studies process? So from where you are today on the oxides through to the full FID on the sulfides?
Well, I would like to think that by the end of this year, we'll be able to communicate to the market, hopefully in the form of a preliminary economic assessment, how those sulfides come in with the oxides. At that point, once we've defined the project and defined the production rates, we'll have a much better idea how we want to proceed. And then we're going to have to go through the normal standard course, which is the preliminary feasibility study through the feasibility study. And that could take 1 or 2 years. But once we get the oxides into production, we've got a 4-year window where we can deliver that and then start to work on all of the environmental work that will need to be done on the sulfides.
Joe, great stuff. Appreciate that today. Sorry to be so blunt at the end, but I'm trying to unearth something, and I think we kind of got to a good place at the end of it. Stay in touch with. I'd really quite like, and I think our viewers might enjoy, is if we could get into a little bit more technical on the drilling. Maybe come back and speak to one of our geos on how you're planning that, how you're mapping out maybe some of the modeling that you're looking at, and again get into some of the conversations about the options available to you on the sulfides. That would be great.
Yep. And Matt, if people are interested, if you go to our website, we've got all of our drill information available through the Verify platform, which gives a 3D view. It's quite an interesting tool for people who want to prowl through it, and we're happy to share that with people through our website. So by all means.
Beautiful.
Thanks very much.